PACE, or People's Action for Clean Energy, is a nonprofit. We've been around since the 1970s, promoting clean energy, promoting a transition to this clean energy economy, 100% renewable, 100% electric world. We tend to work with towns, helping them understand their energy use and transitioning to this new world. This event is also hosted by the Connecticut Energy Network, which is a group of groups. It is really the collection of people who are in towns, clean energy advocates. They're typically on the Clean Energy Task Force, their Sustainability Committee. They're out there really in the trenches doing things. And I think it's so the Connecticut Energy Network is really managed by Clean Water Action, and Ann Hulick, who is the executive director of Clean Water Action, sends her regards. She's not able to join us today, but wishes us well on this event. I think it's worth pointing out what is the purpose of having an event like this, and I think there are a couple goals that we have. First of all, as I mentioned, this is a group of doers, right? You could say that our slogan is "Try this at home," right? So if you live in a community, a common interest community, or you know someone who does, or you work for a property manager, or you know someone, right? Get the word out, see what's possible, and try this at home. I think the other goal that we have is for, and we'll talk a little bit about this as you'll learn, the legislative action on this topic is unfinished, right? It's what we could call a sort of a partial success right now, but there's work to do. So we want to be aware of maybe what we can advocate for and what is remaining. So those are really the two main purposes of today's event. We've got, I think, a really good lineup. So I'm going to briefly introduce the three speakers. You'll get these slides with their bios and their emails following the event. But very briefly, Andrea Dunn is an attorney. She is with the firm Bender, Anderson, and Barba, but the real capacity in which she's speaking today is vice chair of the Legislative Advocacy Committee of the Connecticut chapter of the Community Associations Institute. So the CAI supports their members, the community associations, in many ways, but solar and EV charging is one of them. After Andrea, we have Tom Meek. Tom is a resident in one of these communities in Simsbury called Powder Forest Homes. And Tom has really been on the front lines. Powder Forest Homes has been right on the front lines. They were, as far as I know, the first of these groups to determine that the law had changed, that solar was now going to be easier to do for residents. But there was a lot of work that had to be done with figuring out how to actually implement this new law. And Tom, as president, past treasurer of this association, was really, as I say, on the front lines working this out and has some real hands-on experience for us. And there's an example of the first home in this community that now has solar. So he knows of what he speaks. And last but not least, we're thrilled to have State Rep Jeff Curry from East Hartford, the 11th District, who was very active in advocating for the legislation that passed, and I think can also help us understand what is left to do. As I say, you will get these slides, you'll get the recording, you'll have their email addresses. So without further ado, I invite Andrea Dunn to sort of set the ground, sort of lay the groundwork for us on this topic.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you see, am I sharing correctly, Mark?
Yes, looks great.
Okay. As you know, I'm attorney Andrea Dunn. I work at Bender, Anderson, and Barba, and I am also on the legislative. It's actually the Legislative Action Committee, but that's okay. Through Community Associations Institute, there's a National Community Associations Institute, and I am part of the Connecticut chapter. Great organization. If you're not a member, become a member. That's my spiel for that. So quickly, I want to go over, because there's some confusion, and I get it. When there's a lot of bills that come out and you never know where it stands, what happens, unless you're on the front lines. So what do we have currently? Because that is causing some confusion. So what changed with the Senate Bill 4, I believe it was. So this is a part of your rules now, 47261B, and it modified G. So this is what is your current legislation on this topic. And it specifically says in the case of a common interest community that is not a condominium or cooperative. So this current legislation exempts condominiums or cooperatives. An association may not adopt or enforce any rules that have the effect of prohibiting any unit owner from installing a solar powered generating system on the roof of such owner's unit, provided such roof is not shared with any other unit owner. An association may adopt rules governing size, manner of fixing the system, responsibilities for upkeep and maintenance, prohibit on any unit owner installing upon any common element. So we don't want a prohibition on installing that. I forgot my word for a moment. So that is what the current statute says. So a lot of people ask me, condominium co-op, how do I know? How do I know? Because mine and every condominium or co-op or planned unit development can be different. It might look like, some of our condominiums are converted apartment buildings. Some of them are standalone structures, some of them. So how do you know? Well, that's in your declaration. Everybody kind of always says bylaws, but your declaration is your document that when the developer was coming to think about your community and putting it to the town or city in which it is, they have to come up with this document, a declaration, and it has who, your unit boundaries, your maintenance responsibilities, who you are. And it also clearly defines if you're a condominium, a co-op, or a planned unit development. So it's usually always in Article 2. And it will usually say, the name of the common interest community is you want to live here village. And it'll then have a further sentence that says you want to live here is a condominium. So what you have is defined in these documents. And that's important because sometimes people are like, well, it's not really, I have a standalone home. But what's it defined as? What's it filed on the land records as? And that is what you are. If you're not defined as a condominium or co-op, you're probably defined as a planned unit development. We shorten that, we say PUD. So if you are defined as a condominium or co-op, you're not a part of this rule just yet. Could change. We'll see in the upcoming session. So this means that essentially your association can continue to prohibit the solar roof panel installation on the roofs. And most of us know that's because roofs are common elements. So then the other piece of it, so the people that this is working for right now, if you're defined as a planned unit development, can you call a contractor right now and I want my solar? Maybe. I know lawyers always say maybe, and you guys hate us saying maybe, but it's a maybe. So the other piece of the legislation, as you remember, is do you share a roof? Because that's an important part of this is, do you share a roof with another owner? Is your planned unit development all by itself and the roof is yours and yours alone? If you do share a roof, you can't call the contractor because part of the rule and the legislation that passed was that you can't share a roof. So if you do not share a roof with another owner, you can move on to the next phase of this. Within all of your documents for your condominiums, you're always going to have something. It's usually Article 13. I don't expect you to remember that. There is a quiz later though, but there is something that's called additions, alterations, and improvements within every single declaration for the common interest community. That's a procedure. It's kind of a forward-looking, even though some of your documents are from the 80s. This is a forward-looking thing. This is something within all your documents for these types of situations. I want to add something. I want to do something like the solar panels. So you're going to look to your documents first. And hopefully your communities, now that this is a thing, will start to develop some rules, and maybe a procedure and a packet for you, for your community when they come to the board and say, hey, I want to investigate these solar panels, and what do I have to do? I'm going to encourage you to, kind of, especially if you're a planned unit development, get that in the works. And I think Tom is going to have what his community did, so that'll be really helpful. Here's what the associations, they can still adopt rules about it. So we can, just like, I don't know if everybody here was around for the satellite dishes. We had similar legislation back then that still gave you the right, like people could use them, they could install them, but you had the right to have a set of rules about those. It's a similar thing here. we can have rules about the size, the manner of affixing them, removing them, and what's going to happen if the unit owner sells their unit. You're going to assign maintenance responsibilities for the upkeep. You can prohibit always installation on the common elements. So, because some people are like, well, there's a nice space next to my unit where I could just kind of install a panel. Common elements are owned by everybody. Remember that. So there's things that we can do as associations. You want to remember, like, you're trying to keep your property valuable and updated so that it's attractive to everyone. So these are things to consider. We can have rules. Reasonable is the key. So that's kind of where we're at. So the procedure is always going to be with these things is just like in the additions, alterations, and improvements. You're going to come to the board. You're going to say to them, I want to install this, and you're going to have information for them. You're going to have plans from your contractor, the company, and they're going to get everything in front of them so that they can look at it and make an educated, they're going to get back to you and say yes or no. So you need to have your ducks in a row when you come to the board. And that's why I say communities should be getting these rules in place and procedures so that people are like, okay, let's look into it. And it's always going to be the same: licensed contractors, insurance issues. That's when all of that's going to come into play. So you should always have a procedure, and you need to go to the board and lay it out for everybody. And that's how this whole thing starts. So, but that's where we're at currently with the not sharing of roofs, planned unit development. So that's your current legislation at this juncture.
Andrea, thanks. That's a great sort of laying the scene for us. So let's move on now. Again, Tom has been dealing with this in his homeowners association. So Tom Meek, over to you.
As mentioned sort of quickly by Mark, I'm the president of our homeowners association at the Powder Forest Homes. Our community has 106 homes in total. 96 of those are freestanding, so they do not share roofs. And we have 5 duplexes, two units per, and therefore 10 in total. And of course, they do share roofs. All of our homes were built during the time frame of approximately 2006 to 2010. It is an age-restricted community, which means that 80% of our residents, or 80% of our homes, have to have at least one resident that is 55 years or over. There are no children allowed under the age of 18. And I say that because it gives you a flavor that the average age of our community is currently in the, I'll say, upper 70s. I mean, I don't have any scientific background on that, but that's my best guess, knowing pretty much everybody there. We have governance like every other homeowners association. In the declaration, it spells out any requests for the additions, alterations, etc. Will go to an architectural review committee. We call that our ARC. And that is the first point of contact. And then we have a board of directors of 5 members. We each are elected for 2-year terms, and we're staggered. So this year, 2 will be, terms will be finished, and then the following year, then 3 will be finished. So history with solar is very interesting. And Mark and I know each other for quite a while, and Mark has been privy to some of this history. The very first request that came to Powder Forest was about 9 years ago. A home had been damaged by a fire, and in the rebuilding process, they applied to the Architectural Review Committee to install solar on the roof of that home during the renovations. All I'll say is that I don't know that there was a lot of conversation. It was rejected pretty quickly. And that was it for the time being. A second request came up about 4 years ago. Again, a request made to our Architectural Review Committee, who rejected it again. It was appealed to the board, which is part of our governing documents. That's the right of any homeowner. If it's rejected, they can appeal. We had an open meeting, and we'll just say there was a lot of discussion. There were a lot of questions, and as I say here, there was a considerable negative sentiment from the residents. I mean, the common thought there was, it would impact the view of our sort of pristine New England community. So sort of under duress, I'll say the board voted to reject that second request. So last October at one of our board meetings, one of our residents brought forward the fact that the Clean Air Act had been passed and it went into effect in October. And that's the first we had heard of it. So we members of the board were not knowledgeable about it. We asked our property managers if they had any insight, and they were also sort of just learning and just trying to wrap their heads around it. So we noticed that the relevant language, which Andrea did sort of cover, was actually on the bottom of page 30 and the top of page 31 of a 35-page document. So we had a lot of discussions initially amongst the board members. How are we going to proceed? What are we going to do? It says we cannot prohibit, but we can create rules. So but we don't have to create a rule. So we decided that the best approach would be to create a rule. The first step with that was to obtain legal guidance from an attorney with significant HOA experience. And Andrea is one such attorney. We used one local to us in the town of Simsbury, and he helped us prepare an initial draft. As part of our governing documents, whenever we change rules, we add rules, change them, we are required to hold an open meeting to allow residents to comment. And so we provide notice. I think it was 5-day notice requirements. We held our first initial meeting in January. So we were trying to move along pretty expeditiously on this. And so I'll try to be kind as far as how that meeting went, but from prior sentiment of sort of anti-solar, we had comments that first were saying, well, you can't possibly allow it. You shouldn't do that. And that started to shift. And so we had to reinforce the fact that we cannot prohibit, but we can provide a rule with some requirements. So we went from you can't allow it to where should we allow it, to then, what really should we be requiring of an applicant? And the where to allow there was quite a bit of discussion about, well, you can have solar panels as long as we can't see them. And that may sound, at least initially, pretty good, but depending on the orientation of your home, if you were forced to put it on the backside that couldn't be seen, you could end up having a very inefficient solar system. And so we sort of came back to the concept of reasonable. Any rule that we enact has to be reasonable. And we probably said that 100 times in various meetings. So we went from the don't allow to the where to allow to what should we be requiring of an applicant. We worked through various rule revisions. And we held a second meeting with our residents to allow, again, initial commentary, because we wanted to make sure we were, following our requirements for the declaration. And that meeting went quite well, actually. I think we got past the two sort of initial thought processes and into the what should we require. We have an application form that we built that is based on the rules. So I'll talk about that a little bit. So the application is sort of broken into a few areas. The first is, who is the vendor? How many years experience do they have with solar panel installations? What are their Better Business Bureau ratings? It's really important to have employees, or in some cases, contractors that are certified to be doing this sort of work. And of course, the vendor has to be properly insured with workers' comp and liability. So we wanted to make sure, and this is something that a normal person would do as far as their part of their due diligence. But it was important for us to make sure that those sort of things were investigated based on the vendor. The next area was, what is the design of the system? So we wanted to see a diagram of how the panels were going to be installed on the roof. We wanted to know how many there were, the color, how they were going to be mounted. We needed to know where the location of all the wiring and equipment was going to be. And if there was any external wiring, is there a way that we can hide it, put it in conduit that can be painted to a color to match so it blends in. We are encouraging, not requiring, but encouraging that all the wiring be done through attics. So you will have a penetration through the roof, but then running the wires all the way through there. And also very important was that the integrity of the roof had to be determined and certified by the vendor. So some of the other things that we included was, we did not want any homeowners to start making changes to the exterior, such as landscaping or trees. If they have an issue with the canopy and that the trees are shading the roof of their home, then they would have to come and request a removal of trees, and no guarantee that that would be approved. If there are any out-of-pocket costs that the homeowner or the homeowners association will incur, and it's sort of unlikely, but if there were, they have to promise to reimburse the association. But of course, we would advise them in advance if that should happen. And then the ongoing upkeep and maintenance, they have to agree to maintaining good repair. And we have situations where there is one resident who's actually leasing their system, so they don't actually have ownership. And in that situation, the company that is doing the installation and providing the lease will be responsible for ongoing maintenance. So currently in Powder Forest, we have 3 applications that have been received. The application went to the Architectural Review Committee. And given the initial nature of this, the board was also involved with the review of those applications. We held a meeting with the folks that were applying, and the ARC and the board, and of course took a vote at the end of that process. And all 3 applications were unanimously approved. And I think that speaks to, and I don't want to take credit for all this, because the chair of our Architectural Review Committee has been very, very helpful and very active in putting together the application. But it speaks to the fact that our application, I think, was pretty thorough. And after those 3 applications were approved, we felt at that point we had a good working rule. And so the board then did vote to approve the rule, which was something we were required to do. So going forward, I expect there will be more applications for solar. I don't think it's going to be a huge thing in our community. Again, sort of the nature of our folks. Some of them aren't thinking that far out, 10 years or so. We also, based on a request from a resident, have started to evaluate using solar for our clubhouse. Our clubhouse it's not a huge facility, but it's got a conference room, meeting rooms, a small kitchen, exercise room. But also is part of the electric bill associated with our clubhouse is some of our street lights. So it's a pretty significant annual expense. So we're looking into that, and there's some nuances because we are a homeowners association. There's some kind of unusual accounting and sort of things that we have to deal with. But that's where we're going. And I think that's pretty much our story.
Terrific. Tom, thank you. That absolutely fascinating, and great to see that you worked your way through the new law and what it means for an association like yours, and came out with some what seemed to be very reasonable rules, and seemingly without the pitchforks coming out. So I think that's a testament to probably your level-headedness and your respect within that organization. But that's great. I'd like to invite Representative Curry to share with us a little bit about what you're seeing in particular. While Tom was in the trenches of an HOA working out the rules, you were in the trenches of the legislative process. And can you share anything from that experience? And what do you think is sort of left to do? So over to Representative Curry.
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. And first and foremost, thank you for allowing me to speak with you today. I think this combines a couple of hot button issues here in the state of Connecticut, whether it be housing, utility costs, renewable energy, and a mix of all. Building off of the successes that we had in Senate Bill 4 in the 2022 legislative session that Andrea went over earlier today, we tried to close one of the loopholes that had excluded folks from being able to participate in having solar installation. And this wasn't even on my radar until a resident within my district reached out who owns a detached unit and wanted to know why he couldn't do this. And just so you all know, the 11th district, I represent parts of East Hartford and Manchester, and I have a number of associations within my district. So this is something that hopefully will be able to impact many folks in my particular area, but also around the state. This year, in this legislative session that ended at the beginning of June, through that process from January to June, we had House Bill 6805, and that was within the Planning and the Development Committee, chaired by Representative Cavros DeGraw. And the bill was put up to again close that loophole and to allow those with detached units to go through the process similar to the one that was outlined earlier, to be able to have solar installation on their roofs. The bill out of committee was not as specific as it wound up being as it continued to play through the legislative process. We wound up working very closely with the Connecticut chapter of the Community Associations Institute and their lobbyists. And basically, I'm not a subject matter expert in this. Legislators are not subject matter experts in this. And so we often reach out to those who are, because obviously we don't want to do anything to you. We want to do this with you. And so we had some good language that was drafted and later approved. That we clearly had to define what a single family detached unit was. We needed to outline the entire process from start to installation and thereafter. And we did this all to not only protect the owner themselves, but also the associations, as you were all kind of binded to this common agreement. So ensuring the requirement with bylaws, insurance protections if needed, any sorts of costs associated with the installation, as well as a clear process for transfer of property should someone decide to move out and or move into the unit itself. We also had discussed giving some time for associations to get on board, and so there was an opt-out provision that would have allowed folks to kind of take a breath and to come to terms with what the legislation was and ensure that their own bylaws and processes were in place. And so they would have had that opt-out until 2026, in which at that point, there would have not been an opt-out. And this then would have gone into full effect for all folks. So what happened? So we were able to get this out of the Planning and Development Committee. This then was discussed for a number of weeks with not only the House, but also Senate members. We had tried to work with the chairs of the Energy and Technology Committee, so that's Representative Steinberg and Senator Needleman, to include this within their larger energy bill, which was Senate Bill 7. Ultimately, we were not able to have that included. I think there were some still who were concerned with the reasonable expectations that unit owners have when they join these associations, and that this was a substantive change. And then you get into the whole aesthetics conversation. But I think, you know, there are more and more folks who are understanding that it is 2023, change is hard. We understand that, but I think when we're having these conversations, especially when it comes to renewable energy, the cost currently associated with what we're all paying on utilities, that this is a direction that Connecticut is going to take. And so we just want to ensure that as many people as possible are a part of these conversations, so that we're checking off all the things that we can that we need to in order to kind of get this over the finish line. We did pass it out of the House, so we did take an affirmative vote on that, and we did send this to the Senate in that form of 6805. If you happen to go online and you look up, if you want to kind of nerd out and geek out over that, if you read what product came out of there, it wound up including a couple of the things unrelated to solar. So don't confuse some of those provisions having nothing to do with this. Unfortunately, it did not make its way out of the Senate. That is just simply a timing thing. I think this was stalled up enough where there wasn't that bit of push by the Senate to get this out and onto the governor's desk. So now we look forward to the 2024 legislative session, which begins the beginning of February, in which we will have to go through the entire process again, going through the committee, then down to the House, then over to the Senate. But I think we have gotten, hopefully, ourselves to a point where more folks are a little bit more educated about what we're trying to do. And I think, you know, what we can ask from folks is to join in on whether that's providing feedback that other things need to be tweaked, or simple support. If you, again, pull up the House Bill 6805, you'll see there were only 2 pieces of testimony submitted. One was from me as the sponsoring legislator, and one was from a private organization, both in support. So it's going to take everybody kind of getting their arrows in the same direction to ensure that this gets over the finish line, to be able to provide this opportunity to residents throughout the state of Connecticut.
Terrific. Thank you. A quick question, just following up, you know, as a resident in Connecticut, is there something each of us could do in a conversation with our legislator, just encourage them to co-sponsor this or to support this when it comes their way?
Yes, absolutely. When we are into the committee process, come February, March, yes, we will definitely ensure that this gets out to the right folks so that you all can get it out to your right folks. So that conversations, yes, can be had with your individual legislators, and also targeting the specific committees to ensure that they are getting that out of committee itself.
Terrific. Thank you. Well, that was certainly one of the clearest explanations I've ever heard of the legislative process. You know, we've got lots of really good questions in the chat. I want to start with one from Bernie Pelletier, because I think it frames the discussion well. Bernie, do you want to ask your question about prohibiting and allowing? The language gets very tricky in talking about this topic.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. And this, I don't mean to be a linguistic trickster here, but in my mind, I've characterized before the 2022 legislation, every common interest community was allowed to allow. So if a progressive common interest community wanted to allow solar, nothing stopped them from doing it. This is a question. I think the efficacy of what you did in 2022 was that for planned unit developments, you were prohibited from prohibiting. Is that a fair way to characterize it?
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Excellent. We've got a couple folks who have some experiences that they wanted to share, maybe in the form of a question. I think the first I saw was Sharon Hutner in Branford. You're in negotiations on this. Do you want to share your experience, Sharon?
So I'm Sharon Hutner from Branford. I'm on the Clean Energy Committee in Branford. And I'm an alternate on the Planning and Zoning Commission, and I'm on the Coastal Vulnerability Committee. So you can see I'm really dedicated to the environment. And I'm the Sustainable Chair at Turtle Bay Condominiums, which is not included in the new law. It's one of those old-fashioned condominiums built in the 70s that has shared roofs. And but what I had been doing was trying to see if we could get solar on the clubhouse, because at least that would be something that would not be a shared roof, and hoping to save money on electricity. But in looking at the bills that came through the clubhouse, a few solar companies that I worked with said it wasn't feasible. It really wouldn't save us money, and it would cost more in the long run. So I kind of, kept my eye on what was going on out there. And then in Branford, we had Solar Smart campaign, and Posigen was one of the solar companies that worked with us. And so I reached out to them, and they said no, that they didn't have anybody doing anything for condos at this time. But then all of a sudden, I did get an email from a salesman who was offering to replace our roofs with solar shingles. They would pay for the installation of these roofs. They would monitor them and maintain them for 20 years. Where we had flat roofs, where we do have a number of flat roofs, they would use solar panels, and they would get the electricity. We would not get any break on our own electric bills, but they were wanting to sell back, is my understanding, the electricity to Eversource. And then we would get some money back from them, from that usage of the electricity. So we've been talking now for about 6 months or so. And so we're right now in the process of asking them to send us a copy of the leasing agreement. We want to see what the actual shingle looks like. They say that they're in partner with a roofing company, and so that's how they are able to do this. I just want to share this with people out there who are not in condos that are not covered by the law, that if this is possible for Turtle Bay, this could be possible for a lot of other condos out there. So I'm just actually really sharing. People can contact me directly if they want more information.
Super. Thank you. I think that speaks to Bernie's point that stuff like this was and is allowed, right? What changed is they couldn't stop you from doing it for individual members, but good to hear that that's
well, we have shared roofs, so we do not qualify under the new law.
Right.
So we have to get, our board still has to approve it. And we may also have to change our bylaws.
Yeah.
So we're still not quite sure exactly the road that we're going, but we're willing to follow through and see if this can actually happen. It would just be amazing.
Any comments from any of our speakers on Sharon's experience?
Actually, yeah, Sharon, I'm going to reach out to you because we're sort of facing that same dilemma. Part of our issue with putting solar on a clubhouse isn't so much that it can be done. We know it can be done because a homeowners association doesn't really have assets on its books other than cash and investments. It becomes kind of a weird thing of how do you actually fund the installation of solar? I mean, we got a quote that was about $50,000. And so there's some real kind of strange bookkeeping kind of stuff. The company that we did get a quote from to purchase would not lease it to us. So I'm actually looking for a company that would be interested in leasing. So, but yeah, I mean, it's an interesting concept.
Yeah. Okay. I'll put my email in the chat now.
Great. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Terrific. And Arlene, you shared some experiences you're having in the chat as well. Was there any, did you want to elaborate on that at all?
We are just starting on looking at, so we have shared housing in one area. And in this area, we have a big garage bay, which is perfect for solar. But we're looking for Eversource or the state to provide some incentives like they're doing for EV. We're also looking to potentially install an EV charger. So we don't think that we can afford to do this without some state support and incentives. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, okay, terrific. Thank you. There was a question from Tom Sokolowski for Representative Curry. Can you explain the reasoning behind the current restriction of 20 gigawatts per year for small commercial solar installations? That's a whole can of worms. And did you have any comments on that, Representative Curry?
Unfortunately, Tom, I do not have a response for that, but if you would like to email me, I am happy to follow up with you.
I'll take a moment just because I know PACE was very active in this legislation last year when the limits were doubled. It went from 10 to 20 for these small. I think a lot of us leading into that session sort of scratched our head and said, why do we need limits, right? And in fact, at some point, we all might want to advocate for getting rid of those limits. I think historically, the limits are a function of the way the program is designed, right? It's an auction. And if we had no limits, essentially what they do now, the bids come in and they sort them in descending order of the bid price, and you select the lowest price, actually in ascending order. You select the lowest and keep going until you fill up your allotment. And if you just kept going, you would get more and more expensive projects. So if you don't have a limit, this auction process doesn't work. So you'd have to kind of redesign the process. Very doable, and we'd love to see those limits go away, but there are reasons why they were there. And fortunately, they got doubled last year. There was not appetite in 2023 to increase them further, but let's renew that conversation for 2024. And we have a question I see from David.
Yes, thank you. We live in a condominium that has shared roofing, so I can appreciate the legislation still under development for further actions or whatever may come forth. But I was kind of curious through all this if any of the speakers or the people that were more involved in the investigation had any kind of dealings with insurance companies in regards to this. And the reason I'm saying this is because across the street from us is a big apartment building that has 3 floors. And within that, they have all their utilities in the attic space, much like a lot of condominiums are developed. And this building had added solar quite a few years back on the roof. It's a flat roof, but they added a good bank of solar panels to the roof. I'm going to say it's about 5 years ago, because it's this legal settlement has taken some time. They had a fire, and the fire originated in this attic space. And I don't know what the outcome, if they proved it was from the electrical or from the solar or any other utility that was occupying that space. But the bottom line is, it took a long time for them to rebuild this building, which they're still in process of doing right now. But I happen to notice that it looks like they're going back to solar, but instead of placing them on the roof, they're now building these stanchions in the parking lot area, which will house the solar panels above the parking. And I'm wondering if there was any kind of influence from the insurance industry in regards to that.
Very interesting question. Does any of the panelists have any insights there?
I mean, haven't heard. I mean, this is the problem. The shared roof thing is, that's why the legislation reads this way. Is, you have to understand that condominiums, planned unit, we're complicated. Our documents define our boundaries, and roofs are quite often common elements or limited common elements, and the maintenance, the board's in charge of this, and the insurance, we're required to have insurance on our betterments and improvements. And, we worked the language this way specifically, to try to help with that, because there are insurance issues. And that's becoming a difficult task with insurance and new legislation, and claims are on the rise. So that's why it reads the way it does, because it's easier if we don't have a shared roof. When we're talking about panels on the rooftop, things that happen like what you're talking about. We had a fire, what caused it, and who's going to maintain this? Well, now are we in charge? It's not our, it's for this unit, put it on there, it's not ours. Is everybody benefiting from this? Is everybody, but everybody owns those common elements together, right? So it is a little difficult, and that's why it's, we work so hard in drafting the language, and with Representative Curry, and he was a part of that, understanding what we need as communities to make it work if we want to have it. So I haven't dealt that much. We do have an insurance person on our panel at the LAC who really helps us with this kind of stuff, so that everybody, you want to be covered. You don't want to be stuck with something happening and have it be like, well, you know what, you altered that roof and you put the solar panels on, and now it's we're not covered, or for whatever reason. So I haven't, we're still in the beginning stages of this to see how it's all going to apply and pan out.
I see. Thank you. We have a question from Kim Stevenson. Is anyone thinking about combining solar with battery storage for HOAs, creating a solution that can provide backup power during a power outage, and creating a community resilience center? Any thoughts on that?
We do have one of our applicants who is replacing a standby generator, which is natural gas powered, with the battery storage. So their approach is to go completely off fossil fuel as much as possible, which I think is going to be 100% for them.
It's a really interesting question. I mean, I could imagine turning your clubhouse or one of the common buildings if you're adding both solar and battery storage, it sort of turns that also into a bit of an emergency shelter as well. Right. So interesting. Interesting question. David, I see your hand is raised.
Yeah. I think most of the offerings that we see in the state from various contractors right now, because I was interested as well, is it something where you can collect and use the power? But it seems like most of them are, if you're generating more electricity than the standard utility is providing, then you're rebating or charging back the utility. I think that's how the majority of the systems that are available are working in Connecticut. I would think the storage thing would be a far better application for a lot of people, but I don't think the offers are being built that way.
Right. Any other questions or comments? We're coming up on an hour. I'd like to thank our speakers, Andrea Dunn, Tom Meek, and Representative Jeff Curry for taking time to really, I think this was the absolute perfect team to cover all aspects of this question. I think this will be a video that we'll be sending people to with a lot of good practical information. So share the word. If you're in one of these communities, go talk to your association or your property manager. If you know others who may not know that the legislation has changed, that the prohibitions are no longer possible, get the word out, because there's hundreds of thousands of people in Connecticut live in communities like this. As we know, not all of them are covered yet because they're condos or co-ops or they have shared roofs. But this is a big change that could affect a lot of people. A great opportunity for a solar installer to go into a community and perhaps get a handful of projects, not just a single one. So Again, thank you, speakers, for a really clear and engaging discussion of this topic. If there's any interest in, further topics, including, I know we were talking, Andrea's expertise is not limited to solar, and I know one area that is very much something that the Community Associations Institute works on is EV chargers as well. So if there's interest in that, let us know. Maybe we'll do a similar one on helping apartment communities and condos deal with the issue of EV charging for their residents. So, but again, thank you all. Go try this at home, and thanks for joining us today.